Hey there everybody, SQ here. Today we're going to be continuing our Guilty Gear character discussion series, and today's character of choice is we're going to be talking about Faust. Now Faust is kind of an interesting one because throughout the history of Guilty Gear, he's kind of always been a very strong character. Consistently near the top end of the cast in most Guilty Gear games. And in this one, in Guilty Gear Strive, I would say that public opinion seems to be quite the opposite to that. So let's just kind of talk about like what makes Faust unique and talk about what makes him maybe not so strong in this game, especially compared to how he has been in the past. So what type of character is Faust? Faust is kind of two types of characters rolled into one. His basic game plan is he kind of just wants to control neutral with his bigger normals, right? He's got like his far slash, he's got his 2H, which is very big. He's got sail pull, which is a special move, but same concept, right? He also has some pretty big jump normals. He has like JH, for example, which can control space, especially when paired with his air dash. And then he also has items, which are, we would describe him as an item character, which is a very common character in Arxis fighting. And the whole premise of the items is that they're supposed to just kind of help him hold down the neutral, right? That's pretty much what this character wants to do the entire time. Of course, he does have some offense, but I would say like the wheel for this character would be playing neutral. Now, the issue with Faust in this game is that while he does have these bigger buttons and he does still have the items, when it comes to his normals, they all tend to have bigger hurt boxes, which makes them pretty easy to either stuff with like a counter poke, right? If you're playing like a character like Soul or a character like Ram or whatever, they don't have a hard time just running up and hitting far slash a bunch against him because so many of his normals extend his hurt box and he's just already a big character, right? And they also tend to have a decent amount of recovery to them. So with punishing his normals, especially because they have extended hurt boxes, makes them a lot more contestable than you would like them to be. Even though they do outrange most of the characters, it's not that hard to deal with because of their hurt boxes and because of their recovery. And then for his items, I'm gonna be real with you, they're just not that good in this game. Compared to how they've been in the past, his items have always been incredibly strong. And don't get me wrong, they are still decent in this game. They do help him. They don't just like help him win, right? They're not that broken. They're just pretty good, and they don't really make up for the downsides of his normals or anything. And in fact, his items kind of have two different issues in this game. One of them being the fact that because his normals are worse, because all of these moves have big hurt boxes and all of that, it is much harder for Faust to like keep his opponent at bay, right? If he wants to keep his opponent away from him, that way he has the space and the time to throw out items, his normals aren't that good to actually do that. So getting the items out is pretty risky, especially because they have a lot of recovery in the game. The actual item toss itself is pretty laggy. And then on top of that, the items themselves just aren't that good. They don't actually like justify how weak some of his other tools are. So the best thing about his items is he can kind of just rapid fire them and get a bunch of them out. And what makes Faust, an interesting character is that when you have all these items coming out, you have to kind of have on-the-fly decision making, right? You kind of have to like figure out how you want to use these and how your opponent wants to play around them. That's kind of what makes him an interesting character, and generally having tools like that is pretty good, right? If you have tools that make your opponent respond to you and gives you something to punish them for, that's pretty good, right? So items are still beneficial to him. They're just not that great, especially relative to the rest of his kit. Most of these strong characters in Strive, they all kind of fall under a pretty similar formula. They all have some combination of strong pokes that either have like very little recovery or massive hitboxes, or both. And those strong pokes will then lead into high damage or good Oki, or both. Faust's pokes don't really lead to much. He doesn't really get a whole lot off of them. Especially like without a counter hit, he gets like, if you hit somebody with like a far slash, for example, that's not all you get, right? You get this, and then you throw out an item. It did like no damage. You don't really get OP off of that. If like a Ram player or a Soul player just happens to counter hit you out of your far slash or your 2H or whatever, their reward is significantly higher than what Faust would be. Faust just doesn't really keep up with the risk reward off of his buttons, even though they are good in a vacuum. It's the type of thing that like he can hit you a couple times with his buttons, but the opponent can just make it up very quickly. Going into his offense is also not too great in this game. He doesn't really have any types of plus frames to work with, and he doesn't really have great gatlings for pressure either. So like he has full slash, which is, okay. His 2S is like minus 19 or something. It's like actually like a laughable number. Like it almost seems like a bug. When I first heard how negative his 2S was, I was just like, is that correct? that true? I don't even know if that's true. It is true. His normal is massively negative on the line. So because of that, he's kind of forced to use more of his H normals, which isn't too bad, but he doesn't really have good special cancels after his H normals either. Most of his special moves are like either very unsafe or like kind of gimmicky. You know, he has this, but this move is also very punishable. His pressure just isn't super good. He does have a command grab. That is like one of his strengths as a character. He does have a command grab. But do you see how little damage that does? That is not a lot of damage. Most command grabs of the same do way more damage than that. If you talk about like Potemkin, you talk about Mei, both of their command grabs do a lot of damage. Soul as well. If you talk about a character like Nago, his command grab doesn't necessarily do direct damage, but he might as well do a bunch of damage to you with how it works. Faust has bad pressure, so it's very hard to actually get somebody to want to block as Faust. His pressure is both weak in terms of like the actual options, and his reward from his pressure is not very high. If you get hit by like a 2k 2d, he doesn't get anything off of it. He can't even like combo from it. This isn't even a combo. Like you get punished for doing that. So it's bad pressure options and pretty bad reward as well for like stopping somebody for trying to avoid your command grab. And then the command grab itself doesn't do a lot of damage. And what some people might say is like, okay, well it gives them an afro, right? And what the afro lets Faust do is when your opponent has an afro, by the way, it's still very funny. When you have the afro, it like gives them access to like instant overhead setups, right? Because you can basically explode the afro with different moves that are related to fire. Faust has to use his bad pressure to command grab you just to get the option to mix you up. The chance. You're not guaranteed to open them up. And even if you do open them up, you don't do that much damage with it. Other characters just basically win when they command grab you, and they have better pressure options on top of it. Faust does, of course, have items which can assist him in his pressure if you get a good situation. But most of Faust's item situations are pretty like, I mean, first off, you're basing it off RNG. You're trying to get like a good item, trying to roll well. And even finding a time where you can get an item out in Oki is kind of difficult because of how laggy the item throw is itself. So overall, Faust, he doesn't play Guilty Gear Strive because most characters kind of follow a similar formula, like I was saying. Even some of the weaker characters like Anji, for example, or Gold Lewis, they still follow the formula of Strive pretty well. They have things that can make you scared, and they have high damage output off some things. Faust doesn't do that. He tries to play something else, right? He tries to play a more mid-range focused game. The problem is Faust is off meta in a way that is not beneficial to him. But it is unique. I'll give him that. He is pretty unique from the rest of the characters. So if you like seeing a character with like a funkier playstyle, and to be quite honest, a character that takes a lot of like on-the-fly decision-making because of his items, he does kind of fit that role. He's just not particularly strong because of it. So that's pretty much it for Faust. He is an interesting character, and he is fairly unique, and he's usually quite strong in Guilty Gear, so it's kind of interesting that he ended up not strong in this game. He just kind of has more weaknesses than he usually does. His normals aren't quite as strong as they typically are. His items aren't as good as they typically are. So that's gonna do it for this video. I am curious what you guys think about Faust. Let me know down in the comments below. Do you agree with me that Faust is not too great? Or do you maybe think that he just needs more room to develop? Because he is kind of a, I don't want to necessarily say a complex character, but just due to the nature of items, I think he takes a little bit more effort than some characters. And I'm curious what you guys think about your matchup against Faust. If you play a character that is not Faust, what do you think about fighting Faust? Do you think he's difficult to fight? Do you think he's easy to fight? Also, if you do enjoy the video, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out. And consider checking me out on Twitch. I do stream quite frequently. You can find a link to that over in the description below. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed watching. I'll see you in the next one.